All right, we're recording now. Okay, Billboard.
Nice.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Namaste. Assalamu alaikum. Good evening, good night, or good morning to all of you. And we are so pleased to have so many people in this meeting from all over the world in different time zones. I am Shakira Mohammed from Trinidad and Tobago, a teacher for the past 15 years. And ladies and gentlemen, this is the 208th edition of our ICC Thought Leaders Forum. And we wish to sincerely thank all of you who have contributed in whatever way to the success of this ongoing Pan-Indo-Caribbean and Pan-Indian Diaspora Global Project. So for what 207 unbroken continuous weeks, we have been here every single Sunday. And in the past 4 years, we have featured 874 presenters from all parts of the world speaking on 207 topics. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a weekly forum being hosted by the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center, a legally registered research and publishing company operating since 2010. And in order to continue this weekly program and to make it bigger and better, we are kindly asking for suggestions, as well as volunteers and donations, and you can contact Dr. Kumar Mahabir for details. So ladies and gentlemen, I'll introduce you to our moderator for this evening, who is Shalama Mohammed, the co-director of this ICC Zoom platform, who is a business teacher and researcher from Trinidad and Tobago. She obtained her master's degree in business psychology from Franklin University in the USA. Shalama, welcome.
Thank you so much, Shakir. Assalamu alaikum, namaste, and a warm welcome to all of you. Thanks so much for choosing to be with us. This program is being recorded on Zoom and live streamed on the YouTube channel of the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center. So I want to say welcome to all of you on YouTube at this time. To avoid intrusions from trolls, Daryl Gransom, our IT manager, has muted everyone. Speakers, please do not admit anyone, do not unmute anyone, and do not allow anyone to share your screen. Thanks so much for cooperating. Ladies and gentlemen, the month of May has been officially deemed Indian Heritage Month in Trinidad and Tobago because Indian indentured laborers first arrived on May 30th, and in St. Vincent and the Grenadines on June 1st, in Reunion on June 3rd, and in Suriname on June 5th. We also have a number of other countries who would have already celebrated in May, such as Grenada on May 1st, Guyana on May 5th, and so on. To mark the significance of this month, our program today is about the botanical afterlife of Indian indenture. The legacy of Indian indentured laborers in the diaspora is reflected in the plants they introduced to their new homelands in the form of British, Dutch, French, and Danish colonies from 1828 to 1917. They brought plants and seeds such as hurdy or turmeric, fruits like mangoes, and jackfruits called katahar or koa, depending on where you live, and a variety of edible vegetables and medicinal herbs. These plants changed and diversified the local flora, agricultural landscapes, and cultural ecology, mainly in the Caribbean, Fiji, Mauritius, and South Africa. Indian indentured laborers and their descendants produced botanicals from these plants that they used for medicinal, culinary, religious, cosmetic, and aromatic purposes. Ladies and gentlemen, over the next 2 hours, we will be hearing more about this from our distinguished panel of speakers. And we begin today with none other than Dr. Kumar Mahabir. He has a PhD in medical anthropology from the University of Florida and is a university lecturer and the author of the book entitled The Still Cry, An Oral History of Indentureship, and another interesting book entitled Medicinal and Edible Plants Used by East Indians of Trinidad and Tobago. Welcome, Dr. Mahabir.
Yes, welcome. I'm getting problems to see my PowerPoint here.
You're on.
Okay, I don't want to. I wonder why. Hold on.
Your video is also off.
Yeah, I know, but
Would you like me to share?
no, I don't know why I'm not seeing it today.
Okay,
hold
so
on.
let's walk through this. Is it open on your screen?
Yes, it's open.
Can you share screen from Zoom?
Hold on.
Okay, there we go. Something's happening.
Something is happening, but it's not the screen I want to share.
That's
Hold on.
correct.
Let me try again. It
Mhm.
was working all the time. Right, I think I got it. Right, you're seeing it now?
Yes,
Okay.
you want to go to slideshow?
Yeah. Okay. I may have to work like that for the time being because somehow I'm getting difficulty today. All right, we'll have to let it go like that. I'm afraid.
Try shifting one up, one down.
Okay, it's not working.
No, that's not shifting for us. Maybe Shakira really could run it for you.
Yeah. Let me. Why is this? Okay. Maybe you'd have to work it like that. Is it okay?
It's
Oh,
okay,
Shaki,
but
Shaki, okay. I sent it for you. Why not try?
okay, so you'd want to stop share and Shakira, please
Yeah.
share. Slideshow.
Right. Okay.
There we go.
Good. Right. So the topic of the panel, and my presentation is entitled "The Botanical Afterlife of Indian Indentureship." Afterlife, meaning that our legacy has remained, our contribution of indentured immigrants. It continues after generation. And on the image here, you can see the tulsi plant, which is very popular. It's common because it is also a sacred plant. So almost every Hindu home in the diaspora has a tulsi plant, and it's usually near their jandi. Next slide. Right. So we are really, most of all of us who are on this panel today, it's animated so you can click, are going to talk about ethnobotany. And this is a multidisciplinary field where people from almost every discipline can contribute and be part of this subject area. Sciences, the people in the sciences, the humanities, biology, chemistry, geography, and so on. And it's really about the interaction between people, plants, and culture. In this case, we are talking about Indian people and Indian culture. So it's it's studying plants, not limited to plants which we use and which we make into food or clothing and shelter. But more than that, plants that are used for religious ceremonies and ornamentation, which Dr. Gabrielle is going to talk about, Gabrielle, and for healthcare. And I believe that most of these plants have survived and have been preserved mainly because they have been deemed to be sacred. And you see the changes in this field of ethnobotany. In the past, it was really confined to what villagers use, but today it has expanded to even take a quantitative perspective. And researchers are looking at plants and for environmental management and reducing poverty levels and all of that. So it's a very interesting field, but the people who are most into this multidisciplinary field are really ethnobotanists and anthropologists. And of course, like everybody else, is concerned about the ecological damage caused nowadays by the global warming and climate change. Yeah, next slide. So this is an interesting quote from a book that's been published in 1920. That's the year indentureship ended. Immigration ended in 1917, but indentureship ended in 1920. And this is Harry Frank, who is a foreigner, white foreigner visiting. And he observed that on the way to Debe, but most of you would know Debe, that is Poloriville, where you get your Sahina and so on. At that time, and probably still is, a wholly Hindu town, predominantly Hindus. And he saw a stream of people coming down the highway. By highway, he would have referred to as, that would have been the main road because there was no highway then. And in Penal, neighboring to Debe's Penal, there are miles of vegetable gardens and mud and reed huts that seem to have been transported direct from India. So what is clearly seen here is that the Indians they transported India in a lot of ways. In fact, there is a book, I think, by Brinsley Samaru and Debbie Dean, India in the Caribbean. So they reproduce the environment. They reproduce India in many countries in the diaspora. Next slide. Right, so very importantly is an article published, not published by Brinsley Samaru in 2021 in the Journal of Indentureship and Its Legacies, produced by the Amina Ghaffur Institute. And I'm glad that Professor Debbie Dean is in the room here. And this article is entitled Changing Caribbean Geographies, Connections in Flora, Fauna, and Patterns of Settlement from Indian Inheritances. So wherever Indians went in large numbers in the Caribbean, but particularly in Trinidad, Guyana, and Suriname, they introduced a lot of plants and animals, like and sometimes the British did that too. So there were a lot of things that were brought to the Caribbean before indented immigrants came, because there was always that connection between Britain and Trinidad and India. And I am so pleased that Professor Samaru, who has passed, sadly, has quoted heavily from my book, which I'm going to show in a little while. It's a recognition of my research, and I'm thankful for that. So it's a very good article that all of you should read in this Journal of Indentureship and Its Legacies. Next slide. And this is an abstract from that same article. And he wrote, there is no doubt that Indian immigration to the plantation colonies changed the geography of those colonies. There's a nice way of seeing things, change the geography. And he wrote that they were ingenious, these indented immigrants, and their descendants as well. They contributed to the plantation economies. These Girmitias were well aware that they were going to agricultural occupation, and most of them were agricultural workers. So naturally, they would bring fruit, seeds, and cuttings with them because they're going to a tropical land, almost the same climate and soil like India. And so they, in fact, added to the flora of the plantations. They had a lot of foreknowledge. They didn't come empty-handed. They brought a lot of these seeds and fruits in a jahaji bundle, which is a term that Samaru popularized, jahaji bundle. Next slide. So this is my book, in which I've documented that legacy, that contribution of Indians to the flora of Trinidad and Tobago. And I've documented 63 local plants, given them their botanical names and so on for many uses. The book is entitled Medicine and Edible Plants Used by East Indians of Trinidad and Tobago. So on the cover, you see a nutmeg, which came from India originally. And it's popular in Grenada, the Spice Island, to which a lot of us are going to in this room here. In August, we have organized a nonprofit tour. So we are going to the Spice Island in Grenada, where nutmeg is very popular. This book has been, next slide, this book has been a bestseller ever since it was published in 1990. On the left is the first edition. On the right is another edition, and it's always selling. Next slide. And the book has color photos, but I've reproduced some of these color photos in the back cover because as a publisher, printing color is very, very expensive. That's why a lot of books have black and white, text and images. The color is expensive. So I've tried to economize the use of color by placing a lot of these important plants on the back cover. Next slide. Right. So, you know, we can study plant in a number of ways. We can study how plants can be used for conservation. And I have published an article here in 2011 in the University of Southern Caribbean Journal, in which I looked at religion and plants used as rituals, plants and also by women. So Dr. Gabrielle would love this, by Hindu women. And in this article, I pointed out that that women are an important group in the cultivating and conserving some of these plants. They have their kitchen gardens, and sometimes they use it for at home. Sometimes they share it with the community. Sometimes they may sell. And if you look at the last sentence, in their tireless attempts to promote biodiversity, conservationists may well have to adopt a new approach by working with religious groups and demonstrate to the public at large how plants protection is related to religious values. So there is that connection which we have to look at. Next slide. Right, so this is the layout of every page in the book. This is a depiction of the Hardy here. So I have the botanical name, I have the family name, on top I have the common name, Hardy, Indian saffron, turmeric. I document the origin, and all of the plants I have documented are from India. Sometimes we think a plant is from India, but it is not, and vice versa. A description, I describe the leaves, I describe the shoots, the roots, the flowers, and also the chemical composition. And the most important part of this book, which makes it a bestseller up to this day, is its medicinal uses. So, and I want to emphasize here that most of the information from this book was not taken from the internet, because there was no internet then. In 1990, when this book was published, it was based on oral tradition, research in the field. I went to the villages and all kinds of places, and I interviewed the elderly folks who told me how they have been using or how they knew about these plants being used traditionally. So this hardy is actually a miracle plant because when women have birth, they give birth, they make a drink called karha with the boiled rhizome, and it's believed that would cleanse their womb. And even up to today, people who get sprains and blows and lashes, accidents and so on, they make a drink with the hardy, and it is believed to help, and it can be used externally also as a poultice. And it's really a purifying item to cleanse and lighten the skin of men and women. So this is important for women to use this hardy. Those of you who want lighter skin, but there's a whole controversy about that, or you want to purify your skin. Yeah, next slide. And it is mixed with ginger. There's a virus going around in Trinidad now with the cold and whatnot, fever. So a lot of people are advised to make a drink with the hardy and ginger and take it. The leaves are tied around the head for severe headache. So in the study of plants, you really study all parts of the plant: the flowers, the leaves, the shoots, the roots, and each part may have a particular use. Right. So again, after childbirth, women use it to make the skin firm. I use it on the abdomen. And you see it's a tonic there. And there's the edible use, gravy, flavoring, seasoning, and so on. And very importantly, if you look at the other uses, and I'm just using this as a case study as an example, but I have the same layout in the entire book. It's used as a protective charm against evil spirits. So if you go to the imam or pandit and they're making a tabij or a jantar, they may have a little piece of this hardi in that packet. So it is also used in pharmaceutical and confectionery industries and so on. In the marriage ceremonies, we know too well the rubbing hardi, right? Mixed with coconut oil is anointed on the body of the bride and the bridegroom to give that golden complexion. And it is the anointing, the rubbing is considered as a fertility rite. It is used as dye for rice when we making rangoli. So a lot of uses, and this is what people like us, anthropologists and ethnobotanists, do. So most of the information here, as I've said, is from oral tradition, talking to the elderly folks. Next slide. And there is in Trinidad, and I'm sure there are other places too, where you have mango festival. Ever so often, regularly, maybe once every 2 or 3 years, there's a mango festival. And people come and they give all kind of talks and exhibitions, and they show the byproducts and the products of mango. And I have presented a lot of times at this festival. I've been invited. And you can see here the other uses of mango. Again, it is used to make certain items and the bedi, on the bedi and the maru, right, during the wedding ceremony, symbolizing mobility. They make a little step, something like a step, and they put it in the middle of the bedi, that altar. And the wood is considered as a symbol of fertility. So the pira on which the bride and groom sit, that should be made also out of mango. The slippers that is to be worn on wood on the wedding day should also be made of mango. And importantly, look at item 3. The leaves are used as teaspoons, and the bitter stems are bitten and chewed by the mother of the bridegroom as a symbol of sad separation during the Hindu ritual complex. So a lot of symbolism, and these symbolism help helps to preserve the plants so they're not destroyed and cut down as wild bush and so on to be destroyed. And a lot of other uses there. Almost in every Hindu home, in front of every Hindu home, there is a mango tree. And because it's used for all kinds of purposes, to dye and all of that. And whenever all the information, most of the information here is from the oral tradition. And when I cite something from a secondary source, you can see in this last item, I put the citation, right? Next slide. So we are coming to the end. So, what I've observed is that ever so often, every 3-4 years, there is a certain plant that gains popularity. And everybody in the country wants that plant, or the seed, or the bark, or the leaves. So just recently, the Saijan was popular. People were asking for plants to grow this in the yard or in the gardens or in the land. And there was a conference on the Saijan, and I presented a paper, and I talked about how the leaves and the seeds can use to regulate diabetes, because it lowers the glucose levels, and cholesterol too, lowers cholesterol. So this is a Saijan, and it's so popular that now some entrepreneur has maybe a few have packaged these dry leaves, and they are sold in the pharmacies. Imagine that. So that's a whole story. You could talk about that interface between the pharmaceutical industry and these folk medicine and local plants and herbs, right? I think we are going to the almost the second to last slide. Yeah, next one. Right. So what is in vogue now, what is popular now is the dragon fruit. And in my book, I have documented all the details that I've just shown you on Harjo, which is a family of this cactus. So this is very popular. People are buying this now. People are planting this. It's very expensive. I saw it packaged in the supermarket, right? Waiting for you to buy and eat. Delicious. And Shalima photo is there. So Shalima and I went and we did an interview. We visited a farm, dragon fruit farm in Trinidad, and she took notes and she wrote an article. And this is the image of the article here, published in a newsletter called Global Indian, and so this is very popular. So this is the in thing now. This is you have the new kid on the block. This is the new plant on the block. This will disappear in time, and something new will come up. So there's a craze for these types of fruits and plants. And the final slide. So I want to end by telling you of a mantra, and I hope Shalima will call upon somebody to give the Hindi translation. But look at this mantra from the Vedas at 1500 BC. May there be peace in the heavenly regions. May there be peace in the atmosphere. May peace reign on earth. May the waters be soothing, and may the medicinal herbs be healing. Important. May the plants be the source of peace to all, right? So very important, and a lot of discussion can take place on the plants as a source of peace. So thank you very much, Shakira, for showing that. And over to you, Shalima.
Thank you very much. Betty says amen. So I think your mantra resonated well with her, as did your fantastic presentation. And thanks for sharing that new kid on the block. So Subhash has his hands up. Subhash, let's take your question. Are you able to unmute?
You have to,
yeah.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you for the photos, Professor. I mean, that was a very interesting and nostalgic in many ways presentation that sort of, gave meaning to what we have around us. But the origins have been forgotten. The use value is still there. People still retain the reason and why we use hardi, for instance, the hardi plant, the ginger plant. But what I wanted to mention is, the mango tree. The mango tree served the purpose of being a meeting place because of the shade that it offered. So from the cane fields, people congregated under the mango trees. Okay, that became yeah. Even the cattle came and congregated under the mango trees to rest. Mango season in Fiji, because of climate change, the meaning of mango season has disappeared. So we have mangoes throughout the year. Okay, there's nothing special anymore. Like it used to be November, December when we had mangoes. So people used to go to places where there's a lot of mango plants and have fun and party along the roads and all that stuff. But mangoes throughout the year now largely because of climate change. The Saijan plant that you showed, when I was in New Zealand, one of my friends told me we have a vegetarian drumstick, and I was like taken aback because vegetarian drumstick. I mean, is it real? It's the fruit of the Saijan plant that they actually sell in packets frozen. Vegetarian drumstick. The dragon fruit. The difficulty with the tragedy with the dragon fruit was that for some reason we felt that because the plant had thorns on it, we didn't give it much like importance. But now I'm seeing it making a comeback. We see these fruits in the markets. The thorns means asagun. Like yeah. So anyway,
Thank
that's
you,
my little
thank
bit
you.
of contribution.
Yeah, so as you've mentioned that mango tree in the cane field, I have just remembered I grew up in the countryside, and I am one of a minority who didn't grow up in sugarcane estates. We grew up in cocoa, coffee, citrus. So it was surrounded by a lot of plants, citrus and so on, bananas. But we used to plant rice. And in that rice field, swampy, you had the Mary, the bank. And there was only one tree in that whole lagoon, and that was a mango tree. Interesting.
Yeah.
All right, terrific. So nice sharing, Subhash. Let's hear from Manish Tripathi.
Yeah,
Manish?
yes, unmute.
Yes.
Yeah.
So thank you for the insight on the plant, and I mean this is the first time that it was a very new topic for me. Like you are going to the deep nitty-gritty of things. Okay, my question is that after they were transported from India to say Caribbean or any part of the world, has there been any change in their properties? And number two, did they face any problem in their growth in their new environment?
Okay. Sharima, how are you going to? That's a big topic and a broad topic. Can you be more specific, Manish? Yes, no, wait. I think you're unmuted again.
You're muted.
Yeah, it's very
Go
broad.
ahead.
I mean, specific in the sense that, like, when they took those plant, whether the seed or the live plant from here to the Caribbean, I mean, is there any major? I'm talking about major change in their properties, like the haldi or certain other thing. Can you compare? Do a comparative studies there that their properties have changed? And number two, did they face any challenge in growing up because those plants were native to the Indian subcontinent, right? And Caribbean is an entirely different environment. Okay, so whether there is no specific question, like in general, did they face any problem out there? Or some plant they took from here and they could not be grown over there? It was the transportation was a failure, something of this sort.
Yeah, so it's a good area of research. What plants they brought that can survive in the tropics, right? But it's tropical, and this, yes, there may be chemical changes. So that's for scientists and chemists to investigate. And I think he had another item which he wanted to address. Shalima, what was it?
No, I think you addressed the major question.
Okay, yeah.
And just to add to that, in regard to whether or not the chemical composition would have changed, and some plants that may have been brought could not have adapted to this particular region. Well, at this point in time, we are unable to say that, because you're looking at 1845 all the way to 1917. We're now in 2024. So our research has to be extended into that in order to find out. But as far as we are aware, many of the plants that we have are indeed very much the same, and the properties are very much the same as what is in India. So let's take a question now from Jay.
Thank you very much, Doc. It's a very intriguing presentation and something to think about. Number one, being from South Africa and having grown in the market where we had to sell products, and coming from a home where we were very religious, and my mom used to use practically everything that you mentioned, and the tulsi was grown quite a bit in the yard, and we used to use it for even drinking, putting into milk and drinking it.
Right.
And as far as the composition, as I think it was Manish was asking, it hasn't changed its composition. The reason being, I can compare products used to be imported by the merchants from India in the raw state, like the dry turmeric and dry different product, dry ginger and so on. And what we planted, we had estates of it. Besides the sugarcane estates, we had ginger plantations, we had bananas, we had the drumsticks, as you call it, the long sticks, and the herbs, and the different herbs that whatever you spoke about, we had in South Africa. And now it's on mass productions because they've got estates where they produce these, what do you call, fruits. Mango is prominent, and the whole coast where I lived in Natal, where the Indians came at the beginning, now they have mango growing in the Cape, mango growing in the Transvaal, which is Gauteng area, and it's all over the country. And mango season comes once in a year, and it's in abundance. And not being there for the last 35, 40 years, I don't know how. I think Betty can vouch for what's going on with the plants. But as far as I know, whatever you said, we used and we did use for the prayers and for the different medications. I remember when the time I had measles, we used the RD, we mixed it with water and rubbed it on the body. And the leaves, syringa beret leaves, and syringa was common. So all these medicinal aspects of whatever vegetables and fruit that you talked about was common to us in Port Natal.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that, Jay. And there can't be too many mangoes. I had 2 Julie mangoes for lunch. So if we were to consider how it's been adapted, Manish, new varieties were created out of the original ones. So we have Julie and her brother Graham. So anyways, let's bring Dr. Roseanne Kanhai very quickly for the final question for Dr. Mahabir. Go ahead, please.
Sure. Thank you, Kumar, for your very interesting presentation. And my question, which I will try to make brief, is have you or anyone that you know of, and maybe this is going to happen later in this forum, but I'm asking here anyway, done work on how plants, medicinal plants in particular, have crossed cultural boundaries? How, because I grew up in a village where women were exchanging their knowledge and giving each other, oral advice on if your child is sick, you give him that. You bring this from my yard, I take this from your yard. We try it out and see how it works. Some of the knowledge might have come from, in the indigenous history or the African history. I live in a Cocopayol village as well. So some of the knowledge came from there. And I remember people exchanging this kind of knowledge all the time and practices. So is anyone doing this kind of work, do you know of, or would you like to talk about it? Thanks.
Yes, there are a number of people like us who study plants and study the medicinal uses of plants, and they have found that fluidity, because we don't live in isolation, and particularly when people are sick. When people are sick, they're taking anything. They're going by anybody, especially if it's an illness that the doctors and the hospitals cannot cure. They're going by imam, they're going by pundit, they're going by priest. I could probably tell you incident of a zombie or a house possessed, and people go, you look for cure, you look for some remedy, and race doesn't matter, culture doesn't matter. You want a cure. You want to bring this to an end. So yes, that has been studied, but it hasn't been studied specifically. It's in the literature.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to put that into this forum. That's why I mentioned it.
Yeah, sure.
And I'm glad that you raised it, Roseanne, because I think our next 3 speakers may be able to respond to that as well.
Oh, sure. Yes.
Yeah. So thank you very much for bringing that up. Thank you very much, Dr. Mahabir. Very good presentation as always. And I think you'll be happy if I brought on Dr. Lou Kemer as well. She is a postdoctoral researcher in anthropology and ethnobotany at the, I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, is it Quai Branly Museum in Paris, France. Her PhD thesis is on Indian knowledge of plants in Guadeloupe and the Mascarene Islands in the Indian Ocean. Welcome, Dr. Lou. You can go ahead with your presentation.
Hello, everyone. Hi. I will have to turn my phone so I can speak to you. So sorry you can't see me, but maybe we can have the PowerPoint. It's the second slide. Can we have the title, please? Oh, yes, perfect. Thank you very much. So, yeah, it's okay. Yeah, we can see the entire slide, but it's all right. Thank you very much for inviting me. I would like to thank Dr. Mahabir Kumar for inviting me to talk about my research work today. And his work, as he just presented it, is very inspiring for me as I am doing ethnobotany. And as a Guadeloupean, I am delighted to be taking part in this discussion with other Caribbean researchers, and of course, with all of you listening on YouTube and on the chat. My presentation will be simple, and I've chosen the title very close to the one proposed on the poster. So the title is Questioning the Botanical Afterlife of Indian Indentureship in Guadeloupe. In Guadeloupe, where 43,000 Indian workers arrived in the 19th century during the Indenture period. And unlike in Trinidad, Indians in Guadeloupe form a minority in the Guadeloupean population. So in this specific context, that needs to be, it is this specific context, that needs to be examined, the botanical legacies of this Indian migration to Guadeloupe with this context of minority. The domestic garden for me is the ideal place to study this question of the transmission of ecological knowledge. And my research is rooted in the anthropological and agronomic research field on the Francophone West Indian Creole garden. I am thinking about the work of Lucien Degras, Jacques Berthelot, or Catherine Benoit, for example, who worked on this Creole garden in Martinique and Guadeloupe. In these studies, however, the Creole garden is described without mentioning the people of Indian origin. Can you please put the other slide? Thank you. So the initial aim of my work was to explore the Indian contribution to these West Indian gardens and open a sort of opening a research field in this specific case of French-speaking West Indies island. My first writing on this specific subject was my master's dissertation, defended in October 2013 in the French National Museum of Natural History in Paris. I kept working on this topic for my doctoral thesis, defended in December 2022 in Paris at the EHESS, which means University for Social Sciences in Paris. The idea was to start with the memorial postulates, according to which the Indian workers brought plants with them that their descendants would still be planting and using today. I wanted to provide an overview of the ethnographic field on this issue. Can you please put the other one? Thank you. Questioning the botanical afterlife of Indian indentureship in Guadeloupe with an ethnobotanical point of view means, one, to make an inventory of the plants currently grown in the garden of people of Indian origin and trace their transmission. Secondly, record the actual and past uses for food, medicine, or religious practices, just like what Dr. Mahabir Kumar just said. And three, record the vernacular names given to these plants in Creole or French. And then I try to understand if it is possible to confirm that the ecological knowledge was passed on by people of Indian origin from the indenture period until today. I have also evaluated the evolution of these transmissions over the last 10 years, between 2013 and 2022 until now, maybe also. I think that questioning the botanical afterlife of Indian indentureship in Guadeloupe should not be understood only through the Indian migration history, but also through the history of all the populations that came to Guadeloupe. It's just what we talked about during the discussion, like studying the crossings of cultural boundaries. I think it is really essential. In Guadeloupe, in the families of Indian origin, there is a common idea that it was the Indians who brought many of the plants growing in the gardens, just like in Trinidad, I think, and that the Indians have handed them down to us today. This, this idea, it's to justify another idea. And this other idea is that the Indian workers, the ancestors, were the very first to grow and use these specific plants in Guadeloupe. Of course, this memorial appropriation does not fit with the real history of the spread of these plants in Guadeloupe. It's plants like just what Mahabir Kumar just described, like turmeric, moringa, what we call avelka in Creole, like lablab beans, or bitter gourd, for example. There is a vernacular category in Guadeloupe, which is Indian plant, like plante indienne in French, which is a category for naming these plants considered to be Indian in botanical origin and also Indian in culture. When we take a closer look at both the botanical history of West Indian gardens and the history of the social integration of Indians in Guadeloupe, this statement of Indian plants appears to be a way of asserting an Indian identity by appropriating the plants grown in the garden. There are, in fact, two main periods of plant diffusion in Guadeloupe. The first period is the Indian indenture migration period, of course, but it is a period for which we have, at least for now, no written sources attesting to this botanical spread in Guadeloupe. There is also the problem of the transportation of the plant, and like we just said in the discussion, and the problem regarding the adaptation of the plant also, which is a very big issue, and problems for growing the seeds, because we cannot really transporting live plants, it's really difficult. We need to transport mostly seeds. Can we go to the other slide, please? Thank you. So the moringa tree is an example of the plants said to be brought by the Indians in Guadeloupe. If this spread through the Indian migration can be possible with the seeds, for example, the first introduction of the moringa tree in the West Indies dates back to the transportation of enslaved African people from West Africa to the tropical Americas during 5 centuries. Can you go to the other slide? Thank you. It is also the case for the lablab beans, so the avelka, which you all know, widely spread to the America also during the transatlantic exchanges. In Guadeloupe, we have a name like it's called Bois Bukusu, which the Indians do not use. They use Avelka, but we can also call it Poa Bukusu, and Bukusu, it's a place in West Africa. So the second period starts around the 90s until today, when people of Indian origin in Guadeloupe are traveling to India, to Trinidad, to Mauritius, to Réunion Island, and come back to Guadeloupe with plants in their luggage. They introduced in Guadeloupe plants like Tulsi, which did not grow in Guadeloupe before this period. We do not have evidence that Indians had Tulsi in Guadeloupe before the 90s. Can you please put the other slide? Thank you. So if you're interested about this Tulsi plant in Guadeloupe, I have a small publication of this on this subject. It's in French. I'm sorry, I'm still writing in French because I'm the French Academy. And this Tulsi you can see on the picture was introduced precisely from India to Guadeloupe. But in that same garden, I found one Tulsi introduced also from Trinidad. Can you please put the other slide? And this introduction of plants is influenced also by the practice of Brahmanic pujas, like in Trinidad or Mauritius or India. And it influenced also the introduction of many other plants. So Tulsi, Bilva, Ashoka, for example, are one of them. And can you please put the other slide? And I think my presentation will be soon over. It was a very short presentation. So as a conclusion, I've chosen these two pictures from the book of Apasami Morgayan. So I would like to take this opportunity to mention an international conference that took place in Guadeloupe in 2015, I guess. A conference organized by Dr. Apasami Morgayan and Fred Negrit from Guadeloupe, from the association CGPLI in Guadeloupe, which is Guadeloupean Council for the Study of Indian Languages. And they organized this conference, and we were able to publish many works about naming plants in different languages like Bhojpuri, Hindi, Tamil, Creole, and French. Well, thank you very much for your attention, and please excuse me if my English is not really at its best this Sunday evening, but thank you very much for your invitation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Liu. It's interesting to see that both you and Dr. Mahabir covered pretty much the same plants. I suppose they predominate in the gardens of Indo-Guadeloupeans as they do here. So very nice. To members of the audience, if you have questions for Dr. Liu, please raise your electronic hand. Dr. Liu, let me ask you this. Is there any particular part of Guadeloupe, or is it widespread that these plants can be found there?
This is a very interesting question. Many of these plants from the 19th century until the 90s maybe were found mostly in the Indian gardens. It does not mean that they could not grow anywhere else, but the Indians made a sort of diffusion of these plants by growing them.
Okay, so would that be, so are Indians found all around Guadeloupe or in particular sections of Guadeloupe?
I would say everywhere they are. Like in the east of Grande Terre, it's two main islands. So in the east of Grande Terre, you can find many Indian people living there. So they will have these plants in their gardens, and also in Basse Terre, which is the other island, around Capesterre, Sainte-Rose, Lamentin, etc.
Very nice. Okay, thank you very much. So you're getting a lot of compliments for your excellent English.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Let's take a question from Jay. Go ahead, please.
Jay, just want to add, she mentioned that there were some plants come from Africa going north or West Africa. Now you'll have to look at what happened in 1860 and after 1860, when the Indians came to South Africa, to Natal, there were people coming in droves from different parts of India. And they brought with them the most important seed that they carried, which they can, sort of reproduce for food and their culture and their religious beliefs and so on and so forth. So the moringa and the tulsi must have traveled right through wherever the Indian went. These are the basic necessities of living in the home with the tulsi plant. And then you've got the what you call the ginger or the turmeric, and then the marigold. These are all basic essentials for prayers in India, and that was for generations, for eons. So all those things should be looked at not only in the Caribbean, but look at the whole diaspora and compare what was common and which part or which time that they traveled or they were brought down. But exemplary presentation, and it's good that you are zeroing in on this, what you call ethnobotany or ethno studies, and keep our the Indian diaspora alive, because we were what we call very easily brought into the country as indentured people, as slaves, but a new name, indenture. But we carried with us our culture going to all the colonies.
Thank you very much, Jay. Dr. Lu, would you like to reply?
Yes, thank you very much for this comment. It's really interesting. It's exactly this, like the same plants said to be brought by ancestors in Guadeloupe are part of the Indian identity. And it's the same, I mean, in Trinidad and Natal and Fiji and maybe Mauritius, etc. And it's exactly the same plants. And it's really interesting to see how the same discourses can be put on the same plants everywhere in the diaspora. Thank you very much.
Terrific. Dr. Mahabir?
Yeah, that lab beans looks strange to us in Trinidad. Can you? I know you have shown a picture. It looks, and are there other names? Or tell us more about this lab beans.
Yes, there are other names. I put it the Latin name because I did not know how you call it in Trinidad. In Guadeloupe, we call it avelca, which is from Tamil, and we can also use this like sem. I think it's from Bhojpuri.
Same.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's called same here.
Same.
Okay, so it's the same word. But we mostly use avelca in Creole, the Tamil word in Creole. And like it's a plant that came to Guadeloupe during the trade of enslaved people, for sure. But we can say that maybe the Indian came with the seeds, because the seeds are very strong and can resist the long, like 3-4 months voyage route from India to Guadeloupe. And we're not really sure, but it is possible maybe that Indians in Guadeloupe have certain varieties that might come from India, but we're not sure yet. We need like genetic informations for this. So it is a possibility.
Mm-hmm.
I do not know how it is in Trinidad for this plant.
Yeah, it's called the same, and those are the dried seeds. The green seeds, the same would be a little bit, green and a little bit brown, but those appear to be dried seeds.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Manish?
Unmute. Right.
Yeah, okay. So I think indeed a very good, the topic again, and the very fact that being in France, you are, and you need to have a good information about the inside of India, like Tamil and all those things. My question is that you talked about one puja out there, right? So which puja you are talking about, and what are the plants that are used in that puja?
That's a very interesting question. Thank you very much. So what we call puja in Guadeloupe, it's a word that we use for recent Brahmanic style pujas. But in Guadeloupe, we have sacrificial rituals, which are said to be traditional from Indenture period, etc. And in those sacrificing rituals, we use plants like turmeric, neem tree, like many other plants like pan leaves, like betel. I'm looking for the names in English. Sorry, like cloves, girofle. Forgot the name in English. Well, we use a very large variety of plants, which can be used also in the Brahmanic project. It's like exactly the same plants, except that in Guadeloupe, unlike the British colonies, in the French colonies like Guadeloupe, we do not have the trees coming from India, like banyan tree. We do not have banyan tree. We do not have pipal. We do not have ashoka. We do not have bilva. And all these plants are now introduced to Guadeloupe by Hindu worshippers who need the plants to perform like real rituals, like in India, you know? So they want to grow them in the garden, to have them with them, and to produce like a good Ganesha Puja or a good Shiva Puja, etc. I hope it answers your question.
Yeah, I think it did. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And a final question for you from Ramesh Chaitu. Ramesh, can you unmute?
Yeah, thank you, and thanks to Dr. Lu for the presentation and Kumar. I have a different take on this. I was wondering over the years to what extent the plants that Indians use, either from a religious basis or for health or home remedy basis, to what extent these have evolved into the wider society and are used by non-Hindus or non-Indians. And I ask this in the context of somebody mentioned haldi, and I think haldi and ginger. A couple of years ago, I suffer from terrible allergies in Brussels sometimes. So I had to find non-chemical solutions to deal with keeping my airways clear. And digging around, I eventually found 3 or 4 journal articles on research that had been done in the 60s or perhaps even earlier on the qualities, the properties of haldi that had originally been traced to some Vedic writings from a long, long time ago. I forgot when. Anyway, my options to clear my airways are either steroids or a very strong mixture of haldi and ginger, which tastes horrible. So I tend to load it up with honey, unfortunately. But this was like 6 or 7 years ago. In that period, I was wondering to what extent given the huge industry that is now holistic medicine and so on, to what extent either in the Caribbean or anywhere else in diaspora, Indian or Hindu-based remedies have emerged into holistic medicine or even teas, etc., to the wider non-Indian population. I mean, even in France, because I think Dr. Lu is in Paris. I'm in Brussels.
Okay, good. So Dr. Lu, please reply.
Thank you for this question. I think there are 2 answers to this question. The first one is the transmission of remedies from the indenture period until now, which must be considered through this idea of plant spread with the African trade and the 5 centuries long history of slavery and etc. And the fact that Indians might be able to find these plants in Guadeloupe and growing them just like the African did. And the second answer of the question is more a modern topic, I would say, and a commercial one maybe, with the question of Ayurveda and the commercialization of remedies said to be from India, you know, like turmeric, tulsi, some powder of moringa, whatever. And these are 2 specific questions, 2 different type of transmissions, which are really interesting to study because the Ayurveda, for example, in Guadeloupe, is studied by people of Indian origin in Guadeloupe, and they use sometimes when they do not have the Indian plant, they use some plant endemic in the landscape of Guadeloupe that have the same properties in a remedy that would be a Vedic one, for example. And I think it's a very interesting process.
Okay, excellent. So thank you very much for sharing that and for responding to all the questions, Dr. Lu.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's move now to our third speaker, and we'll have some more information for you from Dr. Gabrielle Hosein. She's a senior lecturer at the University of the West Indies in Trinidad and co-editor of the book entitled Indo-Caribbean Feminisms, Charting Crossings in Geography, Discourse, and Politics. She's also the co-editor or the editor of the journal entitled Indo-Caribbean Feminist Thought. Welcome, Dr. Hosein.
Is she in the room? She was here earlier.
Yes, she is. We can... Great.
Okay. I'm not seeing it. Sorry.
Afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to try and share my screen, please. Okay, so everyone should be able to see this?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gabrielle Hosein. Thanks to the organizers of this session. About a year ago, I started a project called the Botanical Afterlife of Indenture. And that project is an art project, and it has a number of different components. Two of the components are being discussed today by me and then by one of my collaborators, Vinnie Harri-Chan of Cutlass Magazine, who will be speaking right after. Scholarship has long noted the disciplinary power and violence of a colonial archive or a knowledge system that or a knowledge system and practice that acts and is imagined as a physical and metaphorical placeholder of narratives. The potential for arts, oral traditions, ceremonies, and performance to present counter-narratives which decolonize social memory has also long been observed. In his foundational text, Silencing the Past, Michel Rolfe-Trouillot points to knowledge that exists outside of archives, which are also repositories of non-Western and non-Eurocentric knowledge. Such non-formal and non-official repositories and how, where, when, and what they record emphasize the connection between the past and the present moment in processes of memorialization, therefore preserving through praxis the embodied memory of ancestral and indigenous knowledges. Scholars and artists have not only engaged in imaginative ways with the concept of an archive through critical readings that have filled silences and absences, but have also shown how artistic production can challenge archives' dominance over contemporary ways of knowing, remembering, and narrating. Such engagements with the form, violence, and exclusions of archives have been taken up by those working through the afterlife of Indenture. Exploring Indenture and its afterlife, scholars and artists have also developed feminist genealogies of archival practice, which mobilize a range of media, from performance art and dance to visual work that recuperates and decolonizes colonial images, to use of songs, rituals, biographies, and music that highlight alternative politics of memorialization. These have been ways of challenging, expanding, and creating counter-archives through imaginative engagement. Scholars of visual culture in the Caribbean have noted the significance of visual arts to imaging the Caribbean. By the way, sorry, this is an image from Carnival this year, Juve in particular, where I played a Kali Mas Juve. You'll see another image of it. And this is the ship that I created that is traveling through the dark night and then emerges into the blue sky of morning. And so it's a performative piece where the ship is sailing through the Kalapani into the Caribbean Sea, but temporally from night into daylight. Scholars of visual culture in the Caribbean have noted the significance of visual arts to imaging the Caribbean in ways that depart from a colonial gaze. Reflecting on creolizing a visual archive, Roshini Kempedu describes this as a generative practice using technologies and forms that are participatory and performative, seamlessly combining history and fiction. Indeed, for her, creolization is an active practice for the visual Caribbean archive, combining collections of materials and places that are indicative of that which happened alongside the creation and analysis of artistic, poetic, and fictional cultural production. Kempedu further describes embodiment as central to our knowledge of the past and our relationship to memory to history. For embodied and active performing subjects, including scholars, artists, archivists, and critics, are impossible to disentangle from practices that decolonize a visual archive. Moving beyond the visual, Patricia Mohammed has noted the multivaried Indo-Trinidadian aesthetic contribution drawn from ritual, domestic, and imaginary space, which continues to historically and culturally be submerged in both the definition of artistic practice and in the national consciousness of Trinidadian society. There are therefore gaps in both authoritative record and in the contemporary visual archive and discourse about Trinidadian art, which highlight the value of making aesthetics informed by legacies of indenture and Indian Caribbean cultural practices, particularly those of women, more visible. To draw on Patricia Mohammed then, imaging is the act of drawing together many images which summon up a space, past and present, and configuring out of this a future. In thinking about the afterlives of plantation histories, Gabrielle Hosein and Nalini Mahabir turn to literary and visual representations of journeys of indenture to point to narratives and lives still complicated by the shadows of history. And this slide here shows just a number of ways that indenture is being taken up in artistic practice. Casting such a shadow of history, is the Coolie West Indian picturesque. This is a concept by Amar Wahab, which is a homogenizing gaze, which has stereotyped Indian indentured workers as heathen and exotic, as a form of containment and social control, invisibilizing cross-race intimacies and gender crossing in dress and roles, and the realities of indentured Indians' subordinated lives. In contrast to this, art after indenture can illuminate the experience and legacy of indentureship without burdening artists with the task of ethnic or gender representation, instead allowing them as individuals with their specific anxieties, concerns, motivations, and desires, their humanness, and the particularities of their positions and histories as experienced and embodied by them to be expressed. And there's a huge field out there, huge, rich, and incredibly inspirational of people who are drawing on art. So Gabrielle Hosein, Wendy Nanan, this is Wendy Nanan's work with shells. Kelly Sinapa Mary, her image is above. So interesting if you think about Durga and the tiger and so on. Ryan Prasadi, his image is here on the side, and the Gal Feminisms, where he takes drag performance and is here showing the horrors of indenture, particularly violence against women. Sutitra Matai, Tessa Alexander, and Luca Mirage. Portia Subran, and her image is below. This is actually an image she's created with a text that accompanies her thinking about schools and the building of schools at first in Trinidad, and so on. Now, this project, the Botanical Afterlife of Indenture, which I started last year, was inspired both by Dr. Mahabir's work, but also by beloved Professor Samaru, and a piece that I came across by him, which included this list. And this list really became quite inspirational for me, as in this project, I began to think about the way that landscape and botany have been particularly important for creating an imperial picturesque, or a way of creating a pleasing scene that has that hides and has hidden the horrors of plantation slavery and indenture. This is also discussed widely in the field. Krista Thompson, for example, documents how the Jamaican landscape itself was tropicalized or transformed for tourism through making plant life conform to imperial fantasies of nature's beauty, and through framing the region's botanical colonization by things such as cane, cocoa, bananas, and coconut trees as idyllic. Caribbean artists and activists have challenged this gaze repeatedly, engaging instead rice paddies, forests, mangroves, rivers, and flora in their art practice and in their activist politics. This representation has been part of how those emerging from plantation histories overall have been imagining decoloniality. And this kind of project is happening all over the region and also in other spaces. The project is therefore in conversation with work that engages indenture, as well as additional Caribbean work which visually explores the botanical in the wake of colonization and the relationship between nature and the human in the context of empire. And there's work by others that is happening. For me in particular, thinking about the work that I have been thinking about over the last few years, the project also traces itself genealogically through Indo-Caribbean feminist intellectual trajectories, which draw on cosmologies, artifacts, archetypes, myths, symbols, and engagements with embodiment, popular cultural expressions, the sacred and sexual and intellectual traditions and concepts, to think about what does it mean to articulate a feminist praxis where Indian gendered experiences in the Caribbean are not marginal, while being understood in ways centered in a politics of solidarity across ethnicity, class, gender, sexuality, and nation. Such an intellectual trajectory is situated in a larger cartography of post-indenture feminisms, which provides greater attention to the ways that feminist desires call upon and articulate post-indenture culture and cosmologies, and develops an intellectual tradition. And so this is part of my work now, which is how are we able to draw on the legacies of indenture, and not in ways that are authorized, but in ways that represent the radical rebellious spirit of Indian women in indenture history in so many ways. And of course, my work is an attempt to move away from India and framing of the Caribbean in terms of diaspora, and instead thinking about the Caribbean in terms of a post-indenture cartography. So for example, in Juve last year, you will see this was my Kalapani mask, and you can see at the bottom, the hat that I've made is a robber hat with ships on it. And the pants that I'm wearing is a dhoti, and I wore that specifically because of a photograph in the archive where a woman on a coconut plantation is wearing a dhoti, and the way that labor queered women's lives. And so what does it mean to use performance, popular spaces, and embodiment to think about the legacies of indenture in these ways? I have a long love for Mehndi. I've been using Mehndi for birthdays, for just any time I could. And so I've come to Mehndi out of this particular personal love for it. It has a long history in the Caribbean, having been brought to the region with indentured workers along with the henna plant. And of course, is particularly associated with women whose lives in indenture were characterized by exploitation, violence, impoverishment, and inequality. In this sense, their artistic practices associated with moments in the life cycle, such as marriage, mark women's survival and the survival of their sense of imagination and beauty amidst dehumanization and hardship. As part of challenging the silence and invisibility of women in the colonial archive of indenture, this project therefore mobilizes a form of inscription associated with femininity and women, as well as with beautification of bodies that were otherwise framed solely in terms of their reproductive, sexual, domestic, and agricultural labor. So in this project, beauty is very important. As the last line says in this quote from Saidiya Hartman, I think that artistic practice becomes the exercise of imagining beauty and what it makes possible in this world. Beauty is both a practice and a method. Building on this framework of imaginative archives, the afterlife of indenture, feminine aesthetic practices, the project therefore proposes to use Mehindi as a post-indenture feminist language to explore how botany archives indenture in the Caribbean, and of course, to think about the ways that we can create artistic and embodied practices out of this. Such designs can travel across indenture sites, which is what I hope will come out of this project, and even back to India, symbolizing how aesthetic practices are being imagined on post-indenture and New World terms. So this is my daughter Zia here, and what you'll see on her hand is ochre. And I don't think ochre has ever been created as a Mehindi design. I've combed thousands of images, and certainly not in the Caribbean, where Mehindi designs are taken from India or from the Middle East or from the internet or from books. And what I'm instead doing is suggesting that we create our own original designs out of our own indenture history, such as has been discussed here by Lou, in the previous presentations, and use that as the basis for creating our own aesthetic practices. So beautifully here, you will see rice on the fingers and ochre on the palm. In this image, you will see there's a ship on the upper arm and tamarind and mangoes below, and then pomegranates and peppers. This image is very important because I wanted to show that while there was the horrors of the ship and the crossing, the transoceanic crossing, in the hold below deck were the plants were making the journey too, and that the plants had a way of then blossoming when they arrived in the New World. And so this image is showing that as well. The project draws on the flora that came with indentured laborers on the ships in their Jahajin bandals. These were also brought to the Caribbean from India through colonial circuits of various kinds, subordinating indentured women's relationships to such flora in the ways that they related to it through their domestic subsistence, medicinal, ritual, cultural, and aesthetic practices. These plants were replanted in villages and were associated with backyard decoration, food, home gardens, and women were often responsible for subsistence agriculture, ritual preparations, and homemade medicines. And so in many ways, this work centers women's histories, women's art, women's designs, and women's bodies, as well as the roles that they played. In this image, you will see there's a khalsa with mango leaves, then bandania, bay leaf. There's cassava in the palm because we combine the images of plants that came from India with those that came from Africa and were also indigenous to the Americas to make it Caribbean. And on the left arm, there's ganja, ginger lily, henna, pui, and on the fingers, turmeric, which we've been talking about here. There's much more I can say about the jewelry. The jewelry was created through an original design. Joy Mahabir is in this session, and I've been inspired for many, many years by her work on jewelry. And it was created as an original part of this exhibit by a jeweler in San Fernando. And in it includes rice and other and plants as well. Mehindi also affirms our body's deep connection with ecology. And this is why henna, which is ecologically sustainable, was central to this project, further affirming our dependence on, interconnection with, and responsibility for the botanical at this time of crisis created by the logic of empire. It's also important to think beyond the iconography of sugarcane, for me, and the plantation, and to instead commemorate indenture's survival through a much wider botanical landscape, and what I think about as the ecology of indenture. In this image, you will see, sorry, let me just move you to this image. In this image, you will see a chulha, saijan, black pepper, and karaili. And we also, there's many, many images in this project. These are just a few. We also incorporated images from women's lives, their labor, their domestic labor, as you can see here, cooking on the chulha. And there were other images. You'll see a washing line above. and there was a cutlass as well. So the way that we can use Mehndi as a space for artistic practice to record rural women's lives, again, not done before as far as I've seen, but just so important and so intimate to what we know. And on the foot, you will also see Saijan, Moringa, which we've been talking about so much. And let me show you one of the last images. Here is a really cute buffalo, the water buffalo, Aisa. And this is an example of how we created a rural scene. There's sorrel in the foreground, bandania, a traditional house, and on the other side are other images as well. These original Mehndi designs, which we've created in this project, can be applied beyond Indian descended bodies as a way of connecting to the shared legacy of India and the Caribbean. Thus, post-indenture aesthetics offer possibilities for depicting how our shared landscape, implanted with the afterlife of indenture, provides context for multi-ethnic histories of belonging, solidarity, intimacy, and co-produced subjectivities. In this image, there is a on my upper arm, there are cucumber flowers, and then mid-arm is rice. Below that is mustard, and on the fingers is clove. And in Zia's arm, you can't see it as well, but there's a woman in prayer position. Underneath that is a lotus, and then a hibiscus on her palm, and then neem on her fingers. And there's much more I can say about the objects, the material culture, the background, and the clothes, all of which were part of this curated image to rethink how Indian women in indenture were represented in the photographic archive. Building on this framework of imaginative archives, the afterlife of denture, and these feminine aesthetic and embodied practices, the project therefore uses Mehndi in this way, and is attempting to create a living archive of indenture imagined on these terms. And you will see here that there's a woman, she's sweeping. Again, there's been a focus on women's labor. In the corner is a jug that's meant to recollect the milk cellar. And on the front ankle, you will see a little girl, and she's going to school. You can't see it in this image, but there's a bull cart at rest in the distance on the right side of the ankle. And I don't think that I've ever seen a cane cutting woman ever drawn, ever become a Mehndi style icon. And this was very important to us. You'll see on the jewelry as well. You can see the rice on the jewelry as well as the cane and the rice on the wrist. And so this image was really important to show women's strength in indenture, their labor history, and also their artistic practice. So thank you very much. And I'm really happy to have been able to present this project to this audience. Thank you, Charlie.
And we are so happy to have had you present this. This is extraordinarily creative. I absolutely love this. Who is your Mehndi designer?
It's Risa Raghunanan Mohammed of Henna Trinidad, who worked with me over a few months to create these designs, and the photographs are by Abigail Hadid.
And she's here right now, I think.
Yes, she is.
Excellent. Fantastic work. Actually, I think I need to get some of these done. This is Indian Heritage Month. I want to get some henna done, and I want some of those designs that you've done. I have always been in love with the okra flower. I think it is absolutely gorgeous. And if we did not need the vegetable, I would want to pick them and have them saved. But that is absolutely wonderful what you've done there, Gabrielle, I have to say.
Thank you. Well, the goal is to transform Mehndi in post-indenture sites, so we use it to archive the landscape and our landscape around us, and the histories of our ancestors.
So Banmati loves this presentation, and we'll take a question from Jay. Jay, can you unmute, please?
It's not a question, it's a comment. And it really shows the life of an indentured woman and praising the lifestyles over the years, but bringing it into the future, which is showing it so well. And it's an excellent presentation, excellent. And I lived with families that had the Mehndi celebration, and especially with the Islamic community. They are the ones who do a lot of Mehndi stuff. Now it's common to everybody, and which is beautiful in the sense that it shows how we are, I forget the word, sort of, it shows our culture coming out into the open. And all races today do Mehndi paintings.
Thank
I've
you.
seen it done. I've seen it. And it's
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
Excellent. It just gives me goosebumps the way you presented it. It's fantastic.
Very much.
Terrific. So a question from Manish. Unmute.
Yes. So thank you for the, I will say, rather in-depth presentation. You got deep inside the topic, right? It was insightful. Now, my question is something which is not related to the diaspora and migration. It is rather so bizarre that even I am feeling uncomfortable to ask, but anyway, I'll ask. My question is that as you have worked so deeply on this Hina or Mehdi, both you call it, my question is, according to you, because I think you are the right part, what it symbolizes with respect to a woman? Does it symbolizes that women are an object of beauty, okay, or it symbolizes strength to them? Does it symbolize that the women are tender, or does it symbolize that women are powerful? What it is relation with the woman?
Thanks so much for your question. I think the goal is to take a form of feminine artistic practice that has been undervalued in the Caribbean. And, the Caribbean is a place that has been depicted in artistic practice for hundreds of years through European colonial painting. And instead, this attempts to take an Indian feminine artistic practice that is entirely non-Western, comes out of a very different tradition, and to use it to not only depict the landscape around us, but the history that created the landscape. And so it is very woman-centered in many ways. It also seeks to use Mehndi to document women's labor history as well, as part of this. And I don't know, I think beauty is really important for people who have survived the ravages of empire and who were meant to not be treated as human. And beauty is particularly important. And this is not just to be worn by women. It could be worn by men. It could be worn regardless of race, regardless of sexual orientation, and so on. And so the idea is to see people, to create a form of popular art that can enable anybody to connect to this history. Thanks for your question.
Very good. Thank you. Roseanne,
Yes.
you muted.
Okay, am I okay now?
You're okay now.
Okay. Thank you, Gab, for an excellent
Hi, Roseanne.
presentation. So a question, several issues, but I can only ask one. So some time ago, well, many years ago, I was in Cuba and in Havana, and because of the embargo, one of the things that visual artists and, well, yeah, visual artists in particular I spoke to was about how to find materials because they could not import from anywhere else. So they used, they looked around. What they were really stressed to do was find materials around them. So, practically they had to use twigs because they couldn't buy brushes, paintbrushes, or they had to find like indigenous local dyes to utilize in their paintings and so on. I mean, for us, turmeric would be the obvious one, but there's more to dyeing than turmeric. And I'm glad that I think a previous speaker spoke about dyeing rice in order to make decorative beadies, right? So, the dyes that were easily found locally. Is that kind of work happening, and how is it happening? To what extent is it happening?
I can't see, but it's possible others in this session may. I'm not sure, to be honest.
Well, everything has become so commercialized now. For the Pagwa Holi, before we would make our own abir and gulal. Now it's being sold in a lot of stores, so it's for convenience. People
Yes.
tend to buy rather than make.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. I am anxious for us to give Vinnie enough time to present as well.
And we'll have him now. Thank you for an excellent presentation.
Everyone.
And I will ask you to please look at the chat. There are many comments there that you'll want to review. Thanks again.
Thanks.
So let me introduce you all to Vinnie Harri-Chan. He's the founder and curator of the Cutlass Magazine, a podcast and social media platform dedicated to the Indo-Caribbean community and descendants of Indian indentureship. Welcome, Vinnie.
Hi everyone, Sitaram, Assalamu alaikum, greetings to everyone joining from around the world. Thank you so much for having me again. I am using a new microphones and I do have the chat open, so please let me know about my volume, too loud, too soft, and I'll make sure to monitor that accordingly. But I'm going to go ahead and start sharing the presentation. One sec.
I think we are hearing you well enough.
Okay, perfect. Okay.
Okay, and we can see your presentation.
All right, excellent. So starting off, yes, I will be presenting on a project that was done in collaboration between the Cutlass Magazine as well as the Institute for Gender and Development Studies at UWE St. Augustine, and it's termed Indian Inheritances Across and Beyond Caribbean Geographies, and this is an active project. So while we're presenting an introduction to the pieces we've collected so far, this is ongoing and we're still open for submission. And I kind of wanted to skip over some of the things I had in the presentation because I feel like they've been covered by some of the previous speakers. For example, how Indian indentureship between 1838 and 1916 led to a lot of the importation of fruits, seeds, and cuttings from India across the Kalapani to the Caribbean, and how many of those items, even with their Hindustani names, have been standardized in the Caribbean. So even, I remember somebody earlier had asked a question about to what extent these fruits and vegetables have been standardized or creolized in popular culture. And I think when you look at the fact that you read any article in the Caribbean, you'll see a word like dal or bandania or baigan, and oftentimes they won't have an English translation. They'll just have the word as is in Hindustani, and I think that kind of speaks to the level of standardization of these items in the Caribbean and also abroad. And so before I get into the submissions and why we started this project or decided to move forward with it, I just wanted to take some time for a couple of acknowledgements. And I know that Dr. Mahabir and Dr. Hosein provided this same quote here from the University of the West Indies journal, The Changing Caribbean Geographies, that the late Professor Brinsley Samaru had written. But this project really is in memory of the work that he created, and when you see this quote that was shared before, he really talks about all these items that were brought in the Jahaji bundles and how they flourish in these new environments in the Caribbean. And you see many of the names here, whether it's mustard, sarso, black pepper, kali mirch, onion, piyaj, cumin, jeera, lentils, dal. We'll be talking about a lot of the Hindustani names when you look at the actual submissions. So we just wanted to pay tribute to him, as well as somebody else on the call, Dr. Kumar Mahabir, and he showed this book that he had published in the early 90s, I believe 1990 or 1991, entitled Medicinal and Edible Plants, and this really laid an invaluable foundation for the documentation of our regional vegetation in the Indo-Caribbean community. So just making sure to show our gratitude for that pioneering work. And again, some brief acknowledgements. Thank you to everyone who submitted. I believe some of those people are on the call today. We also wanted to, on behalf of Dr. Hosein and I, express our gratitude to Katrin Chan at the IGDS for creating our social media graphics, our online submission form, our project landing page, and our email address, which made this whole process very seamless for people who wanted to participate. And also final acknowledgements for our ancestors and for their refusal to abandon certain aspects of their culture that are the reason why we can have projects like this still today, and in 2024 have a panel such as this one. So mission statement. Now I'm basically going to condense all the text that we have on this slide, but why are we doing this project today? You know, one of the questions that I had about this project was, in 2024, what is the state of the Indo-Caribbean community? When you look at a lot of recent statistics, you can assume that as many, or if not as many, Indo-Caribbean people are currently living in the diaspora as they are in the Caribbean. So what happens to a community that is experiencing the second wave of migration, where half of the people no longer live in the land of their parents and grandparents? And so what does that mean for our retention of agriculture? What does that mean for our connection to the land? And what does that mean for preservation? And just in general, with modernization, many people not depending on what they grow, but going to grocery stores, many people not working in agriculture anymore, pursuing professional degrees and working in other industries that are far beyond or far outside of the realm of agriculture. What is this topic of preservation that we have now in 2024 and for younger generations moving forward? And so we did a social media outreach where we essentially presented these graphics, and we had a call for submissions. And these submissions are really open to anybody of Caribbean descent living in the Caribbean, living in the diaspora, regardless of gender, race, ethnicity, and their images, videos, personal stories of East Indian origin vegetation. And we also made it open to pieces of agriculture that are not Indian in origin, but may have taken on an Indian meaning in the Caribbean because of the fact that our ancestors did preserve, but they also recreated a lot of elements of the culture in the region. And this link, I'll probably drop the link in the chat later on for anyone who wants to see the project landing page, but that's where everyone submitted their pieces. And to meet the curators, again, this was a collaboration with Dr. Gabrielle Hosein of IGDS, who just presented, and also myself. I'm the founder of the Cutlass magazine. And I think Dr. Hosein did a really great job of talking about where she approached the project from. And I just kind of wanted to talk about, you know, my angle of coming to the project. And really a lot of what I do with the Cutlass is trying to show a spotlight on ancestral practices that I think are being lost, particularly around the younger generation of Indo-Caribbean people who don't have a direct source via their grandparents or great-grandparents to really pass down the knowledge. So I've done posts on things like Saijan, which people know as drumstick gourd, or Jingi, which people know as ridge gourd. Some people in Suriname don't call it Jingi, they call it Daroy. I've talked about Lauki, also known as bottle gourd or squash, Nenua, also known as sponge gourd or loofah, Sarputia, cluster gourd, Karaila, Karaili, and how all of those different words change throughout the Caribbean. And then a lot of these posts, they really generate a lot of engagement from younger people who then are encouraged to go ask questions to people in their communities and elders about things that they maybe hadn't thought about before. So again, this call for submissions were open to people across race and ethnicity lines, gender, age, sexuality, all of that. And we got a lot of interest from not just Trinidad and Guyana, but Suriname and Jamaica. We had people in the diaspora in Toronto, New York, Florida, Texas, Seattle, London, people from the Bahamas, Martinique reaching out to us. And one thing I wanted to note is that based on the timing of our project, we kind of started asking for submissions at a time when we were moving into the winter season. And so a lot of people mentioned that they had a lot of crops, but things had died out because of the change in season. And so the reason why the project is still open is because that we know that come spring, come summer, a lot of things will start to flower, start to bear, and so we're still accepting submissions. And along with those submissions, those photos, videos, we really ask people to also talk about personal stories attached to their submissions, whether they're religious stories, cultural stories, memories of their grandparents, people in their family, and to show that this preservation, this ease with the land is still very much maintained by descendants of Indian indentureship. Okay, so I'm going to show some of the selected submissions, and this is just a preview. So I'll start off with myself. I submitted things that I have in my own backyard here in Florida, and I show the image on the left. I know that we've talked about Tulsi often, but one of the aims of this project was to really go in depth about information or cultural tidbits tied to these submissions. And so for me, I sent in a picture of my Tulsi plant, and I talked about how growing up, I was always taught the difference between Ram Ke Tulsi and Christian Ke Tulsi or Sham Tulsi. Ram Tulsi being the green leaf Tulsi, and Christian Tulsi or Sham Tulsi being a more purplish colored Tulsi. And of course, that is tied to Lord Krishna, and how Ram Tulsi would be used for holidays such as Ram Navami, Diwali, whereas Christian Tulsi would be used for something like Christian Janam or Krishna Janmastami. And as Dr. Kumar Mahabir mentioned before, a lot of people have their Tulsi on their properties next to their Jandi or their puja flags. And so in my family, we also knew about the symbolism of Tulsi because we had relatives with the last name Tulsi, and of course that was anglicized to Tolsie, but we know that's obviously from Tulsi, the Hindustani word, and they would wear pieces of Tulsi in a bhek or kanti, which is a pendant that they would have around their neck, and so we knew about the symbolism there. We also could tell in songs like Main Tulsi Teri Angana Ki and Magana Bhai Tulsi, which is a local song, that there's obviously a significant aspect of Tulsi in our culture. Now, going on to the image on the right, that is a currypule tree. And one of the things I find really interesting about currypule is the fact that in Trinidad, despite the fact that many of us are of Bhojpuri Bihari descent, currypule is actually a Tamil word. And so I've always been curious to know why it is that currypule would have been the word that was standardized in our largely Bhojpuri-based Hindustani dialects, as opposed to something like curry pata or just curry leaf. And one story I told over here is meant to again tie in the culture and personal anecdotes with the actual vegetation. And I think many of us in the Indo-Caribbean community, we would have heard of things like you never go and pick a leaf when it's dark, right? Or after 6 p.m. Or things that might seem funny to people, but I was always told from my mom, you know, when you go to pick something from a leaf, you have to beg the tree, or you have to ask it nicely. Or my nanny would say, or elders in my family would say, Dui baat karke put pata ture. Dui baat karke pata ture na noche ture. Which means say two nice things before you pick the leaves. Don't yank the leaves, don't noche the leaves, ture, or pick them gently. And so the reason why I included that is because it shows not just the ease and a spiritual attachment to the vegetation, but the fact that we see vegetation as being a very active, living thing in our culture. And so you obviously in Trinidadian cooking, we cook with a lot of those whole leaves of the pata, but we also put it in our okra and musa and piece it or grind it to make curry powder and things like that. So I wanted to include that as well. Another submission we had was from Davison in Penal, and this is the sehur plant, which is part of the cacti family. Some people might know it as a picker plant. And if you've ever been to a traditional chatti, which is a 6 days Hindu birthright ritual for babies, or in Guyana they have one for the 9 days, you'll take the sehur with the branch that has the leaves, and you'll hang it up by the windows and the door. And essentially what that is supposed to do is to prevent evil, nudger, negativity, or bad mind from entering the home, because they believe that a baby is very susceptible to those things. And so the plant is meant to absorb that. That's why you put it to guard every entrance of the doorway. And the tradition or the saying is that once the leaves fall off the branch, once the patya fall off, then you could remove them from the doorway and the windows. And that means that they've done their job by absorbing the negativity, the nudger, the bad mind. And I'm going to show this video that Davison submitted. Hopefully it's not too loud.
सोने के खरवा राजा रामचंद्र मैया से अरज करे मैया से अरज करे हो मैया हम तो जाइबा मधुबन के शीतल कैसे रखिया हो मैया हम तो जाइबा मधुबन के शीतल कैसे रखिया.
And so that's a local song from Suriname, but also very popular in Trinidad and Guyana, and it shows still the preservation of this tradition even nowadays with these birth rituals.
सोने के खरवा.
Another one is from Dhanraj from Trinidad. He submitted images of the banyan tree and the parijata flowers, as well as the ashoka plant. And with his submission, he also included a number of details. For the banyan tree, he talked about how it's auspicious in Hinduism and Buddhism, referenced in the holy text, that the roots of the banyan tree envelops the main trunk to create a sanctuary at the center, and how yogis and religious seekers often will meditate at the base of the banyan tree. He talked about the parijata, which is a fragrant, auspicious flower, and it's said to be bright orange in color. It is said to have turned bright orange in color after listening to Lord Krishna narrate the Bhagavad Gita. And it's one of the gems that emerged from the chilling of the ocean, which the Samudra Matan, which is one of the stories behind Diwali. There's the Ashoka plant, which Dhanraj has said is often mislabeled as a decorative Ashoka, but as described in the Ramayana, the Ashoka Vatika is where Mother Sita took refuge, and the flowers are described as being red like flames, and Ashoka means without sorrow, or translates to without sorrow. So these are all images from New Grant, Trinidad, dated between 2020 and 2024. This is from Rohan here in Florida, and this is something called the East Indian mango. And one of the things we learned through this project is that in Jamaica there are two varieties of mango, the East Indian mango and the Bombay mango, and they were brought from seeds and cuttings brought from India to Jamaica, where they then thrived and became part of local Jamaican cuisine, and they've retained those names, East Indian mango, Bombay mango. And because of similar weather conditions in South Florida and Jamaica, these East Indian mangoes and the Bombay mangoes have been able to also flourish in South Florida as well. And so Rohan, being Indo-Jamaican, submitted these photos. And one thing to know, one thing to distinguish between the East Indian mango and the Bombay mango is that the East Indian mango is known for being very fibrous. So if you don't have a toothpick, you probably don't want to eat it. However, the good thing is that the Bombay mango is virtually fiberless. So it's very clean to eat. You don't have to worry about anything getting stuck in your teeth. And so that was a really fun submission that we got to involve Indo-Jamaicans in the project. Another thing, this is Lilawati, who is originally from Guyana, and she submitted this plant, this same vine that she's growing, but she's actually growing it in the Bahamas, where she currently resides. So I'll let her explain some of it.
So this is the young same plant. And I say young because it's only been a few months, but already you can see it has some flowers. See how windy it can be here in the winter months, and we have some young same. So it's I am proud that it's at least surviving the cool, dry, windy time of year. This is an experiment that I am conducting to see how the same produces or not in the winter time.
And so, as you can see, Lilawati is following in the traditions of her ancestors, taking vegetation from one part of the world and transplanting it to another. And very much like our ancestors, she is doing an experiment. And in her submission, she talks about her childhood attachment with same because her nanny or maternal grandmother used to grow it. And so she's also doing the same thing, even though there are local varieties of same in the Bahamas. I believe she is talking about a variety that she bought from Trinidad. Sorry, I mentioned Guyana before, but I meant Trinidad. And she talks about how she eats it with sada roti and all of the cultural attachment to it as well. Kavita from Suriname, she sent us a picture of this plant over here, and she talks about how growing up well, she's from Guyana, but this photo is from Suriname during her travels. She talked about how in rural Guyana growing up, she always used to see this milkweed growing, and they would use the flowers, Hindus would use the flowers for puja, and the milky substance that the plant released when the leaf or flower was plucked was known to be poisonous, even though they still use it for religious purposes. And she said we were taught as children so that we would not ingest any part of the plant. And she goes on to describe the flower buds and the thick texture, and how she's found photos of the same milkweed plant both in Mandawa, India, as well as Suriname, and then obviously from her childhood in Guyana. And this photo is dated in 2012 and was taken in Paramaribo, which is the capital of Suriname. We have Max from Sawa in 2024 sent this photo. He said, "This specimen is one of few I got from the fruit of a bale tree at Ramrik Sadhu Temple in Sawa. Ramrik Sadhu's children left the temple years ago and migrated to Canada. The temple was reopened in 2019 by Pandit Parmanand Sharma, and the bale tree was easily a few decades old, but unfortunately was cut down. However, he was able to get a cutting from it, and he said this particular bale tree is worshipped with several offerings according to the Puranas: earrings, flowers, water, and incense." And you see this image here. Now, I know that we talked a lot about Moringa and Saijin, but just to show that somebody from Babis also contributed to our project, they talked about the Moringa tree and drumstick, or Saijin, that grew in their father Budram's backyard garden. And growing up in Guyana, how she fell in love with the Saijin tree and fell in love with eating Saijin bhaji and the drumstick as a child. And so this was a really interesting connection to how she then later brought it to Canada. And as you can imagine, the weather conditions of Canada are very different than Guyana, and yet you still see that persistence of the vegetation in the diaspora. This is from Brandon in Florida, who talks about how in the early 1990s, after moving to Florida from New York City, his nana, or maternal grandfather Galbraith, found joy in planting because of his childhood connection to it. And so, to reflect the diverse Indo-Caribbean agricultural heritage, he started planting things like gander or marigold flowers in his very beautiful expansive land here in Florida. And he uses a lot of the things that he plants for his pujas, and it's something that has been taken up by his grandchildren, who also help to cultivate the land and have grown up seeing their nana really grow this garden into something much bigger than it originally was. And I believe that is oh yes, Alia from Georgetown, Guyana, talked about the significance of the lotus plant, also known as kamal, or in Guyana sometimes they call it purain or the puri leaf, and how it's the lotus flower is cultivated, and how the actual leaf is used for what they call seven curry, or after puja when they make a set of curries and they eat it on the lily pad, similar to how in Trinidad we have the sohari leaf. And so you see from the cultivation of the lotus plant, how it's then used in religious functions. And it should be noted that Alia herself is Muslim. However, she grew up knowing the cultural meaning of the lotus plant to Hindus in her community. And so that is just a peek of the submissions. Like I mentioned, the project is still ongoing. We're still accepting new submissions. And the plan is to showcase them in a multi-component online exhibition, also spreading them through platforms like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, but also to have as components of a physical gallery exhibition slated for early 2025, most likely in Trinidad. And we also wanted to publish some of our findings and our feedback from people in articles and online journals, which we're currently deciding the publishers of. And also all of the materials collected will be archived for future researches and studies. And we also want to make sure we continue to collaborate with existing projects in this space, whether it's Dr. Kemer's work in Guadalupe or Mr. Ben Jacob of Cambridge University and the Amina Ghafoor Institute to reach out to us. And he studied East Indian origin vegetation in Mauritius and Guyana. And so looking forward to continuing to learn about his work. And that is the end of the presentation. I'll go ahead and return it back to the moderator.
Thank you, Vinnie. Excellent presentation and fantastic project that you all are embarking on here. We did indeed circulate on your behalf invitations to persons to go ahead and make their submissions. And although I can't identify any in particular, I can see that you are getting some excellent pieces to work with. My question to you, though, is, has anybody sent you anything on the Dong Street?
Down Street? No, not as yet.
Not as yet. Okay. Let me bring Manish to ask a question. Manish, you want to unmute?
So yes, very simple and nice presentation. My question is related to the cultural aspect. So when people move from India to Caribbean, they carried their culture with them. And as you have seen that how some plant were part of the culture. My question is that whatever culture they carried with them, right? Did they create a new culture out there? So some type of cultural activities they might have repeated as they were doing in India. Some they might have modified as per the place. My question is that whether they created new culture out there also by using new plant or whichever way.
Yes, I think the overall theme of Indo-Caribbean culture, at least the one that we are trying to explore with this project, is that our culture is very much a product both of preservation of ancestral customs, but also within the creolized space of the Caribbean, recreating and adding new attachment to things that were found locally. And so that's something that we tried to illustrate with the project, because I think I mentioned early on that one of the guidelines we had in our submission was that things didn't need to originally be of Indian origin. We were open also to submissions from people about vegetation that then Indian origin was attached to or given new meaning to once people came. And so even something, for example, like bandhania, we know about dhania being cilantro in India and being a very, important aspect of Indian cooking in India. But then when our indentured labor ancestors came to the Caribbean, they came across bandhania, ban meaning wild or growing in the jungle. And so they termed the name bandhania to then use this culantro that they found locally that they could integrate into local practices. So that's also an instance of them coming across something, terming a name like bandhania, and then using it into our food practices. So yes, both preservation of ancestral culture, but also recreation with what they came across locally.
Very good. Thank you, Vinny. Manish, I think you need to come visit us in Trinidad, and you will be able to stop over in Guyana and Suriname because they're not very far away. And I'm saying that because your questions remind me of some comments that were made by another person of Indian origin who is working right now at the University of the West Indies in the physics department, Dr. Dinesh Pathak. When he came here and he went on our first ICC Indo-Caribbean diaspora tour in Trinidad, he commented sometime after that this is like little India. He has seen so many aspects that reminds him of India. It's like little India for him. So maybe you would want to come and either corroborate or perhaps differ. You're welcome to come anytime. Let's bring Robbie.
Namaste, Sir. Assalamu alaikum. You hear me?
Yes, Rob.
All right. One of the things I went to a marathon this morning with my group, so I sleep a bit, right? But I don't know what was mentioned in the Barahi or the Chakti, when the childbirth takes place and there's this plan they put on the door. From my experience, it's a different plan they seem to be using now. It is a cactus that they use, but with the same meaning, the cactus will absorb all the negativity of the if any sort of bad eye or malju takes the child, the plant will absorb it. I think that it could not. The few people I've interacted with after childbirth, they all seem to seek different plants because they don't know what is the original plant. So they've been taking different cactuses and putting it on the doors, as opposed to the original one that was mentioned there. So it's interesting that although we know the culture, we can't get the plant, we substitute very easily. So it's something like that. That is one. And the second one, the plant that was mentioned called the parijata. I was fortunate to get one seed from my guru, and it grew into a large tree. And I found myself being able to propagate the plant, and I sold I put it on Facebook, and I was able to sell like about 50 or 60 of those plants. I still have some. So if we do any ICC tours in Trinidad, I'll be happy to give any ICC member a free plant. I'm trying to propagate some more. The parijata, which is a beautiful plant. You have to spread a chadar, a sheet under the tree, and the flowers collect. You don't pick the flowers. It falls in the morning time at the base of the tree, and it's a wonderfully scented flower. So I like to give my ICC family anything I have. So I won't charge you all. So any ICC member wants a plant of the parijata, I have plants I'm propagating right now. So
excellent. Thank you, Robbie. And before you go, why don't you share your experience with the bail that you had, which you shared with us?
Oh, right. So we visited in our school's effort to look at East Indian arrival. We went to a home of a family that had a cane mill, and our area used to be flourishing with cane, and now because the government had stopped the canes, the children no longer know about canes, and some of the plants, some of the homes where the elderly persons have died, many of them have kept these traditional plants and they don't know about it. So we happened to go to this home and they had lots of different plants, and the bale, although we know about the bale from Shivratri, many persons have never eaten the bale because they have attempted to eat it when the plant or the fruit was not ripe, and it is not very palatable. You have to know exactly when it's ripe. When it turns yellow on the ground, then you're able to have it. And I never had it, to tell you the truth. And a colleague of mine just took one from the ground and broke it in half, and it was amazing to taste it in its sweetness, and sort of honey dripped from the seeds of it. And I'm in speaking to persons on the staff. Our school has like about 100 teachers. Most are East Indians. Maybe one or two have eaten the bale fruit. So that was amazing. That knowledge and that botanical knowledge is being lost in this generation. People are in Trinidad, unfortunately, they are clearing their land of sacred trees and they are selling the land. So we are losing that botanical knowledge. It's wonderful to see that the ICC is preserving this knowledge and future research is being done to preserve whatever knowledge we have here in Trinidad, especially. So congratulations to the team.
Thanks so much, Rob. Vinay, would you like to comment?
Oh no, I was just gonna say thank you so much for those comments and for the very kind offer of, you know, propagating the flowers and all of that. I think it always makes me sad to hear about the land being cleared and all of that knowledge being lost. But I think that, you know, obviously platforms like this, it's nice to see that still in pockets of the community, at least people are trying to preserve.
Indeed. And it's one of the reasons why I asked you about the dungs tree, because we are seeing it all over on the highways and so on, but very few people know that years ago, before it was possible to go to a home, to a funeral home, to have the bodies of Muslims prepared, the leaves of the dungs plant were always added to the water that was used to wash the body of the deceased. So we enjoy the fruit, we use the plant, the leaves in different ways. If it's not edible, it's used for other purposes. And we thank you all so much for doing this project. It's extremely important. Yes, Vinay?
Oh yeah, one thing I also wanted to mention, I didn't get to include it in the presentation because there was a lot to cover, but one thing I wanted to mention is that when you look at a lot of our music, our local songs, you see tie-ins to a lot of vegetation, and I think whether it's Dr. Hosein's project about connecting to feminisms, the use of vegetation in a lot of our local women's folk songs, if people know songs like Gulari Ke Phool, Genda Naturo Maharaj, a lot of those popular local songs, you see the use of vegetation there to talk about love or loss or separation from India or some more, as they call it, like Chatak Matak topics. But I think that was something I just wanted to mention. When you unpack our local folk songs, you can see how central the vegetation was to the lives of Indian people in the Caribbean.
Yeah, excellent observation there, Vinay. Thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank all our presenters today, Dr. Kumar Mahabir, who's also our director, Dr. Lou Kemer, Dr. Gabrielle Hosein, Vinnie Harri-Chan, excellent presentations, and we're all so much more enlightened for it. Thank you very much. Thank you as well to our audience and for all those questions that really add value. So at this time, I'd like to turn you all over to the chair, Shakir.
Thank you, Shalama, and we want to thank everyone, all the speakers and presenters for a wonderful presentation. And we want to thank Daryl Gransham, Ravin Ramsingh, and Miriam Mohammed for being part of the team. And our topic next Sunday will be a proposal to the United Nations to designate May 30th every year in memory of the victims of Indian indentured servitude and its abolition. So please visit our YouTube channel to see all our past recordings. I am Shakira Mohammed from Trinidad and Tobago saying goodbye. May God bless you all. Dhanyavad.
Thank you all. It was such a wonderful session.